Coming up now is a session with Shweta Rajpal Kohli, President and CEO of the Startup Policy Forum, a brand new industry alliance for India's new age companies. As the name suggests, the Startup Policy Forum engages in policy advocacy for new age companies, promotes the Indian startup ecosystem on a global stage, and brings together a curated community of leading startups and founders. A public policy and media professional with over 25 years of experience across venture capital, technology and media organizations, Shweta is a regular speaker at leading conferences including the World Economic Forum India Summit, the Mind Summit, and the UN Gender Equality Summit. Before joining the policy world, Shweta spent 2 decades as a business journalist and TV news anchor. She has received several honors during her journalism career and also as a leading voice for public policy. A British Chevening Scholar, she was also chosen among the 45 global leaders for the Asian Forum on Global Governance Fellowship. Today, as she joins us here this morning, she will delve deeper into the role of public policy in reputation building. Joining her on stage after her talk will be Nitin Mantri, Regional Executive Managing Director for APAC at V Communications and Group CEO at Avian V and Chase India. Shweta, may we have you here?
Thank you so much. It's really exciting, I would say, to be here among a group of, CopCom professionals, marketing executives, and when friends and PR stalwarts like Nitin Mantri and Amit Prabhu invite you to talk, you don't say no, and especially when a topic is as compelling as public policy and reputation building that are both very, very close to my heart. I think I'm more excited about the chat with Nitin, so we're going to jump straight into it in a bit. But both Nitin and I thought it would be appropriate for me to tell you a little more about the Startup Policy Forum and about my journey. So today, why I'm even more excited to stand here in front of all of you is that, I'm talking to you about my newfound I would say journey or initiation as a founder today. Just less than 2 months ago, we founded the Startup Policy Forum, which essentially is going to be what we say an industry alliance for new age companies. And I think to me personally, this is a very, very big milestone, and would love to talk to you all a little more as Nitin and I have that deep dive chat, because I've now closing in on about 27 years of a very exciting, demanding career across many roles. Started out as a journalist, worked in print media, then television. In between my so-called 18-year journalism stint, I also did a so-called corporate media stint at Times of India, where we set up the corporate group at Times of India. We started doing what was called private equity, and that was the first brush in the world of, private equity, venture capital, and then made that switch to broadcast journalism. I think somewhere then I had a mid-career crisis of sorts, which I think everybody faces here at some point, that what next? What do you want to do? How do you pivot? What's the next exciting thing? And I think when I was in that phase is when I realized that public policy is my thing. And everybody said, what, why not comms? Why not PR? And I said, that comes along. Comms is always going to be built into everything. There is, my firm belief is there is no such thing as comms, because you need comms for everything, right? So I think when we did public policy at Uber, at Salesforce, and then Sequoia Capital, which was later Peak 15, a lot of the lessons you learned in journalism, a lot of your communications training comes in handy, and that's some of the stuff that I want to talk with Nitin about. And then here I am now as a founder myself, a struggling founder, but we are making progress. And here's a little bit about the Startup Policy Forum. SPF, or Startup Policy Forum, is what we say the voice of India's new economy. And why we say that, I think super exciting times right now in India where everyone's saying new economies arrive, we're all a part of new India. So is there a forum, is there a body, is there a platform that represents new India? And we felt there was that gap, and that's what we're trying to bridge. Our mission really is to be a trusted partner to founders and policymakers. And how do you become a trusted partner? That's where communications comes in, and we will talk more about it. Our goals are to help shape the policy agenda for India's new age companies, to build a curated community of leading startups and founders. Again, a lot of this is where communications, narratives, all of that comes in. How do you use public policy for reputation building? And of course, to position and promote Indian startups on a global stage. I think this is very important, and this is a slide where I think you all need to understand why we're all part of an ecosystem, why it's going to be a concerted effort. SPF will act as a bridge between the startup ecosystem and the public policy ecosystem. I think startup ecosystem is obvious. Some of you, if you work with startups, will be a part of it. Even if you don't work with startups, you work with big tech, you are related to it. You're going to be part of it in some form or fashion in today's times, right? As leaders, as executives working in firms. But the public policy ecosystem is interesting because it is the central government and state governments. Think of it as obviously your ministers, your political leadership, your chief ministers. Think of lawmakers and policymakers because they are very important too, right? I mean, those that are sitting in those ministries and implementing the policies are those who are sitting in Parliament House and framing those policies and laws, right? Regulators and law enforcement agencies, very important stakeholders because at the end of the day, we know whether it's an RBI or a SEBI or it's a TRAI, those are important stakeholders. Law enforcement agencies, God forbid anyone gets a knock on the door, but in today's times you do. And civil society, think tanks, and media. And it's very important that we count media as part of the public policy ecosystem because media shapes, creates, as well as manages and perpetuates a lot of the narratives. So I think the fact that think tanks, civil society, and media are part of it is very important. I think we also are building SPF on certain values, and this is where the role of communications experts also comes in, right? Judicious use of founders' time. Founders don't have the time. Your CEOs don't have the time. How do you become their sort of hands and legs to do what they require from their goals? Everything we do, we believe, is a marathon and not a sprint, so respectful persistence and persuasion in doing our job. We believe in having a 360-degree policy advocacy toolkit, of which communications is a very big part, but you need that 360-degree, and of course, it goes without saying that it has to be ethical, and it has to be data-driven, because data is king these days. I'll quickly talk about our brand philosophy and how we came up with this. So our tagline being empowering India's new economy, but we talked about, what do we want to represent? What is it that we stand for? And I think we stand for, of course, representing India, and that's why you see the flag colors there somewhere embedded. We stand for problem-solving modernity. In fact, let me walk you through what we mean to different stakeholders. For policymakers, we think startups are like building blocks of India's new economy. They're a symbol of modernity, progress, and nationalism. And the flag colors, we think, signify the boldness of new India. So we incorporated that into our brand philosophy. For founders, company building is like solving a cube. It can be very patternless, it can be very puzzling, it can be very abstract. That's why the cube, because we think that's the journey of a founder. But it can also be very colorful and meaningful if you have the right permutations. And for us at SPF, I think it was very important to see how we fit in. We believe in strategic thinking and problem-solving approach, which is what the cube is all about. We believe in perseverance and judicious use of time, because when you solve a cube, time is important, but perseverance is equally important. And like every cube piece, every stakeholder matters. I want to end with that and invite Nitin over, because I think we want to do exactly that, talk about every stakeholder and you being a stakeholder and how that matters.
Thank you. Shweta, that was wonderful. Thank you. I want to kick off with one question, which is, you've had a journey from journalism to comms/policy, and now a founder CEO. So from interviewing a minister to now pitching to a minister, what's the difference?
Well, a lot, and I would say a lot remains the same, a lot changes. So I think, one thing that I always say is that I feel blessed that across my journey from, in fact, it's been, I would say, a fourth career pivot in some ways, Nitin. Journalism, within that print and television, there are different animals and yet similar. The second, so within the first bucket of print and journalism, a lot of people used to ask, how's print, how is it different from television? So we can talk about messaging there. The second, as you said, was policy, hardcore public policy, of which comms is a part, but it's not truly a part. And I think when you and I started working together, I made an actual shift from policy to including communications and PR as part of the portfolio. So that was the third. And now a founder, right? So I would say to answer your question, what remains the same is it's all about messaging. It's all about narratives. It's all about making the right pitch in that, the 2-minute elevator pitch, the famous pitch. You could be a founder making that pitch, you could be a journalist asking for an interview, or you could be the person who is being interviewed answering the question and getting the right headline. Ultimately, it all boils down to how do you communicate your messaging effectively.
There's been a lot of talk about technology taking over our lives, but I would assume one of the common threads, and we were discussing earlier, is about relationships. So talk a little bit about that commonality, that common thread that flows between these areas.
Absolutely, Nitin. I think you're a master at it as well, but I can tell you the one thing that one has learned, and I think I always take back, is relationships cannot be transactional. And when it's coming from a place of genuine relationship building, at least I believe people can see it through, right? Are you genuinely building a relationship which is long-term, non-transactional? And agendas are okay because we're all professionals. We're all here with our agendas. But I think one thing that I've truly believed in is make your agenda upfront. That builds trust. And having a trusting long-term relationship is very important when you're managing multiple stakeholders. Tell your stakeholder, this is what I'm in for. I'm meeting you for a coffee, but I'm here to build a relationship. And you don't have to spell it out in as many words, but what I'm saying is that keep it genuine and keep it trusting. And what I think hurts relationships the most is when there are hidden agendas. And people can see that through. And, or you're being fake. I think one thing I've realized is that whether I was a journalist sitting in Shastri Bhavan in Delhi, trying to meet a bureaucrat over tea and getting a story out, or today if I'm still going and meeting a bureaucrat again in Shastri Bhavan, trying to influence a policy change for one of the startups that are our members, ultimately the basic tenets of relationship building don't change. It is about honesty, it's about transparency, it's about trust, it's about long-term, it's about spelling out what you're here for clearly and effectively.
Great, honesty and transparency. So you've worked with few clients and several during your stint at Peak. But let me go back to your Uber days and let's get some examples going for the audience here. So can you share some examples of how policy really impacted reputation? And Uber comes to mind because you were at the front and center of that.
Yeah, Nitin, I've had a very fortunate career, I would say, because to be able to lead a team of public policy at a firm like Uber, that is, I would say, the hotbed of, innovation, regulation, crisis, firefighting, everything. And my colleague Avantika is here, who's now joined me at Startup Policy Forum as a vice president. She and I worked together at Uber some 8-9 years ago. And, I would say no better learning ground. But I have some very interesting, I would say every soldier has war story, every journalist has war stories, and a policy person too, right? So there's just so many exciting times. You've been in rooms with policymakers and ministers, and you've enjoyed those fascinating conversations. So maybe I'll narrate one anecdote about how we were trying to build policy. I think first thing is on repetition, and public policy is just assume people don't know. And you think everybody knows Uber. You know what? They don't know it. And yes, somebody will know it's an app, and I'm talking about 2016. So think of Uber having, I don't know when was Uber launched, maybe 2013, 14, came into India around that time. So early days, nascency, people were still figuring out what is Uber. And, this has become even more important, Nitin, you mentioned technology in today's times when we just assume people know. OpenAI is a catchword. Everybody should know what OpenAI is. What is ChatGPT? It's cool to say foundation models, LLMs, we just assume everybody knows it. You know what? It's okay to say, I don't know, and I'm learning. And I think what I admire about our policymakers is they are absolutely learning machines. And journalists are learning machines. They are unapologetic about not knowing things. And they ask you. And it's our job to tell them. So what I always say is in my presentations is, you have to shift the needle from them knowing of you to them knowing you. And there's a big difference. Policymakers will know of Uber, but they don't know Uber. Now, I'll give it with an anecdote. So we had our global head of public policy and communications visiting India, Rachel Whetstone, who used to lead policy. And the first job is, let's go and educate people about Uber. And by people, obviously, your stakeholders are the government. So, Nitin, interestingly, we went into a minister's room, and I will not name the minister, but a very industry-savvy, friendly minister. And we said, hey, we're here with Uber's global head of policy. We want to talk to you about Uber. And he literally said, most people here will understand Hindi. So he says, ye chalta kaise hai? Hame dikhao. And these are genuinely early days. People have not used the app. And the only thing that every minister, every bureaucrat we went to just said, मेरा बेटा अमेरिका में पढ़ता है, वो यूज़ करता है Uber, आप हमें बताओ. I mean, you can't expect a babu sitting who has a fleet of cars to ever order Uber on an Uber app. These are, again, I'm saying early days, 2016 I'm talking about, right? They don't know Uber, they don't know this app. They just know, मेरा बेटा Uber यूज़ करता है, मेरी बेटी Uber यूज़ करती है, मेरा nephew ने मुझे Uber बोला. And we actually did a demo for this minister, okay? And we said, sir, ये app है, ये ऐसे है, ये हमने click किया, अब हम गाड़ी बुला रहे हैं. Now, very interesting question. He said, and very interestingly, he just said, ये phone call कहाँ जा रहा है? We said, sir, कोई phone call नहीं है. He says, नहीं, आपने अभी ये enter किया कि यहाँ गाड़ी आनी चाहिए, कौन phone call उठा रहा है? कहाँ पे है call center? And we said, sir, call center नहीं है, यही तो technology है. That is what we connect riders with drivers, and we did our catchphrases and our narratives. He says, लेकिन ऐसे कैसे हो सकता है? कोई तो phone उठा रहा है ना, कोई तो driver को instruction दे रहा है. Then we explained, showed him the driver version of the app. We got on our laptop, we said, this is what the driver is receiving, this is what the rider is receiving, and it's technology connecting the two. And we actually did a demo, a product demo sitting in a minister's office. Now, to Nitin's point, how does that work in repetition? Suddenly, the same minister, when he was making a speech, was talking about Uber. And you know what? That endorsement is better than any paid advertising that you will ever get, because the minister is more knowledgeable. He knows Uber, and today he is your advocate. So you have used public policy to build an ally, a champion, and an advocate, and that to me is priceless. You can't put a number to it. So I think we underestimate what meetings, conversations, helping people understand and educate can do in repetition building. Nitin, I'll go on.
No, that was great. Thank you. That was a great example. And yeah, if anybody wants to know the name of the minister, you can check it offline. Let's fast forward a little bit to the current scenario. I mean, we have so many startups. You talked about the new economy, and everybody is, most of them are disruptors, right? So you look at gaming, you look at fintech, which is like not only just fintech, but crypto within that fintech space. It's so exciting, and one of the sorry, not your portfolio companies, but one earlier portfolio company, Digintara, for example, in the space. So they're all disrupting a lot of models today. So what is your advice to younger founders and CEOs who may not have policy at top of their mind, but policy can play such an important part in their reputation and also in their actual business model? It can shut them down in some cases, right?
You want the honest advice?
Yeah.
Just two things I tell them. Become a member of SPF and hire the topmost policy professional you can afford. Okay?
Got it.
And why I say that, because I think, and you, Nitin, we have been in a client agency relationship. We're now, I think what most people underestimate is the ability to have good forums, good agencies, and good in-house teams. And you cannot replace one over the other. And I think that partnership is what makes any journey successful. And I think that, to me, is something I tell everybody. Today, on behalf of the forum, for our members, we are helping hire 2 to 3 positions of policy, and we have helped them understand and create the need for that role. Now, I think there is a perfect chance for many of you as comms professionals to pivot into policy, because you know what? The good news, and there are two. Number one, policy is still emerging as a field, right? So there aren't so many policy professionals out there. Secondly, policy is no different from comms. You're just speaking to a different stakeholder. If today you are good at messaging to the media and to the journalists, you can be equally good at messaging to the government. It's all about just changing your stakeholder and tweaking it a bit. But you know what? If your firms. I don't know the profile of people here, but some of you may be with large Indian tech, some with large big tech, some with agencies, some with startups. I would just say public policy is no longer a nice to have, it's a must have, because the public policy ecosystem that I described is a very important stakeholder in doing comms. So today, just to give an example, if a consumer group decides to go after a company, right? Now how do you classify that? And it becomes a PR crisis, and we've seen some of those. I will not take names, but we've seen a lot of these sort of firefighting PR episodes that are driven from a public policy ecosystem but become a PR nightmare, right? So if you're not doing a holistic 360-degree understanding of your ecosystem, then you will not be able to solve your PR crises. So I think, Nitin, to answer your question, the advice I give is hire policy, prioritize policy. Who is the best comms person in a firm? Not your comms head. It is the CEO or the founder. And if they don't understand the value of it, you as a comms head and professional are only aiding. The comms head is the founder. The comms head is the CEO. And if they don't understand the role and the importance and significance of functions like policy, and they stick to their code, "Arey, mera kaam hai revenue badhana, mera kaam hai sales badhana." Your policy, you guys can only aid, but they have to realize the value and importance of it. Have you in the boardrooms, have you as part of the conversations, not make a single business decision without consulting comms and policy. I think when we reach that stage is when we've created value for our professions.
Thank you. I think a lot of people here are from the comm space, and I don't know, how many people here actually look at policy as a function? Anybody? One? That's great. Two, three, actually. Fantastic. And please if you have any questions, keep them ready. I'm going to come back in a couple of minutes for questions, if you have any. Just moving on, we discussed comms and policy and the role in reputation management. One of the crises that we did work together was a company called BharatPe, right? And I'm sure a lot of you have heard of BharatPe as a brand and the crisis they faced. Talk a little bit about the intersection of policy and comms in that space, because that really had to work together to get the company out of that crisis.
100%, Nitin, and most of it is public, so I'm okay to talk about it. But I think what's important is to understand that here this was a very well fleshed out team of internal comms professionals, the general counsel who also looked at public policy, and a very well adept PR agency that came together to manage the crisis. And crisis will happen, and we'll keep whatever we're saying on BharatPe under Chatham House rules, given that, I'm no longer with Peak 15 or Sequoia Capital, but was very, very fortunate to have supported them through this tough period. I think one thing we need to first understand is that narratives are created, and it is our job to debunk myths and narratives and do it intelligently. And I think a lot of that played out during BharatPe, because, sadly, no organization wants to be in a situation where they are facing a PR crisis. It's not an ideal, happy situation. But what do you do when people are throwing muck at you? You can't throw muck back, but you can clean yourself up in the best way you can, right? And I think a part of that endeavor then is, how do you debunk theories? Is there a myth versus reality document? Now your stakeholders are watching, right? You are a regulated company. You could be watched by regulators. And I would say that not just BharatPe, I've seen many, I've been fortunate to have the backstories of many crises that have played out in this country, from a 2G scam to a Vijay Mallya's, entire Kingfisher crisis, to IPL scam, to, seen lots of crises up and close to understand that you need to scratch beneath the surface. There's a lot more. Narratives take over reality. It's all about controlling the narrative, jumping in. Things can get ugly. There are constraints. There are legal constraints. There are PR constraints. There are spokesperson constraints. So I think there is so much that goes into managing a crisis. And public policy, in terms of BharatPe, I can give very specific examples to say, Yes, there were investigating agencies in the fray. Yes, there was a board in the fray. There were legal considerations. There was RBI. There was so much going on. And for everything to come together in a way that you're able to steer a company through that crisis. And today it's great that, it's now, close to 3 years since that crisis broke. And BharatPe has emerged out of it and is doing superbly well. So that is possibly kudos to the kind of teamwork that played out.
No, thank you. And I think it's important to note, just a very relevant, what's happening today is with the changes in the US presidency, we'll all be jumping, right? We were just having a chat, Girish and I, earlier in the break. We'll all be jumping soon enough as comms professionals also, not just policy. So keep watching the space there. That's going to be interesting as well. Any questions? I have many more, but if there are any questions, we can take a couple now. Yes?
Hi. Yeah, really interesting conversation so far. I'm Arun Sudhaman, by the way. I'm just interested in a country as diverse, even from a policy perspective, as India. How important is policy at a regional and local level, and how challenging is it to find the relevant expertise if you're looking at it from that perspective?
Excellent question, Arun, and of course I know you very well. Arun, I can answer that from my Uber experience, and I totally agree with you. When you talk to some of the global, I would say, heads of policy and communications, the one thing they tell you, if you've done policy in India, and I think even communications in India, it's almost like you've done it for a region, right? So 30 states, different languages, different stakeholders, different cultures, different pressure points. I would say forget that. Okay, I'll give you an example around Uber. When we were building out ride-sharing regulations for Uber, transport is a state subject, which means it's regulated at the state level, which means every state in the country can have different regulations. And guess what? We did need local expertise. We needed people who had, I would say, an in each of those states that were important. So you were dealing with a situation where Karnataka was putting caps on surge pricing, to Maharashtra saying, the taxi lobby is not allowing and let's ban, to in West Bengal, Uber was banned. It was just banned because they wanted CCTVs in, and Uber could not have, they did not agree with its overall policy strategy of having, the whole idea is that an app is supposed to be a safe app and you're supposed to share your location and other things. You don't need CCTVs, right? Inside an Uber app, and how do you monitor it? So we spend hours and hours and hours in government offices trying to help them understand that CCTVs as a technology does not work in cabs. But what I'm trying to tell you, and to answer your question, it is very hard in a country like India. We're complex, we're complicated, we're diverse, and forget the states. Within the center, there are so many different stakeholders speaking so many different languages. Now, let me tell you, for startups, right? It's interesting, it's fun, and it's tough, right? Startup Policy Forum today is engaging with, we just did something called the Startup Baitak. And the Startup Baitak was policy roundtables where we brought together founders as well as policymakers in a closed room to have very candid discussions. And we said, you know what? Of course, we love our PR and marketing, and we'll do our visuals and we'll put it out. But the conversations were completely Chatham House, closed door. Not one media reported anything we didn't want them to, because everybody strictly followed closed door Chatham House rules. But in those conversations, while we were organizing Baitak, what came across to us at the forum was, there are so many stakeholders who love startups. So there is a MeitY that has a MeitY Startup Hub. There is a Ministry of External Affairs that has a NEST division. And for those of you who didn't know, this is called the New and Emerging Strategic Technologies Division. So there's MEA. Who would think Ministry of External Affairs is promoting startups? But guess what? They are. And then MeitY has got MeitY Startup Hub. And then you've got, obviously, startups' parent ministry, as we say, Hamara Mai Baap, is, Ministry of Commerce and Industry, which is DPIIT, under which Startup India is housed. So, and now you took at the number of regulators that are involved with startups. There is an RBIH, which is a think tank of the RBI. There is RBI as a regulator. Then there is Corporate Affairs Ministry, because every startup has to start with incorporating, right? So what I'm saying is that India is fascinating. as a country. And, all of us are lucky to be working in a place that gives us such, and the fact that it's not structured, the fact that you have to speak to every stakeholder in a different language. You would have to see what works for them. What are their pressure points? What are they trying to solve? Are you solving for their concerns? And when you've learned that art and you've figured that out, you know what? Every other place is a cakewalk. It's easy to work elsewhere because this is as complex, diverse, Arun, to your point, and complicated as it can get.
I'm just going to add to that. I'm running a public policy firm that we do. Talent is it's not at a premium, it's not there. So it's very difficult. And most importantly, it's not even about the quality, it's about the ethics. So, you need to really need talent which aware of, and will work in that right fashion that you would like to your values, basically. I think that's the challenge we faced over the years. Any other questions? Yes.
Hi. My name is Madhvi. I have a background in public policy. My question is regarded, at how public policy or, policy creation, what is the value creation sort of proposition that is there at the core of the company, and how does the policy influence that? And I want to just ask in the context of two examples. One was Facebook Zero, in terms of Facebook's conception of what the internet was, and then the sort of net neutrality debates that emerged out of that. And the other would be Reddit's recent change to their data sort of API tools, which influenced, meaning a lot of reasons why people use Reddit is because of the open source moderation tools that were available, and that would hamstrung a certain sort of core audience. And then it spoke to a certain value creation proposition at the core of the company. So how does public policy, determine what, how does it influence that sort of equation within the company? And then how can they influence that from different scales in terms of short-term interests, in terms of government regulation, to long-term interests in terms of integration with the society and public reputation?
Excellent question. I'm going to refrain from talking specifically about Facebook and Reddit because it's not in my place. But what I can tell you is that narrative building is important. And again, like I was talking about relationships, narratives also cannot be fake. And they cannot be manufactured just to serve a public policy. They have to come from a place of genuine intent, mission, and genuine data. And I think if you can strike that conversation internally with your I would say large teams and management teams, and get the right data out. So for instance, if you're defending a narrative, right? I think net neutrality, the only thing I would say is that it was a battle of narratives, right? It was a battle of access, narratives. And I think kudos to the people who fought that at both ends. It was public policy at its play, at the highest form. The only thing I would tell you is that narrative beats access. And that's the role that comes in. So when we are hiring for public policy, if somebody comes to me and says, I know so-and-so, and the name dropping, oh, this uncle, and I'm this bureaucrat's kid, and I know this one, and I know that, you know what, that's all BS. Because government officials will change, ministers will change. Nobody who claims to have access is somebody who can ride a career on it. Because if you're a professional, you have to learn to build access. You have to learn to keep access going, and to be able to have that in your muscle, right? You have to build the next relationship. And how do you build that relationship? You be relevant to that stakeholder. And why I was talking about access versus narrative, because access is easy to get. Narrative is the harder bit. And again, completely Chatham House rules, to all of those who thought that Prime Minister Modi was at the Facebook office and did a town hall from there, and it was a town hall the world watched, and 2 months later net neutrality was banned. Guess what? It doesn't matter if you're Mark Zuckerberg and you've got Prime Minister Modi in your office. If a policy has to go through, it will go through. So I think the idea is that you need to understand that, and what played a role in narratives there, what was done on net neutrality. So I think what you need to understand is that it's that 360-degree toolkit that we talk about. And, at the end of the day, understand one thing. Regulators and policymakers have a job to do. Of course they want to be industry friendly. Of course they want to listen to your concerns. Of course they want to, but their job is beyond all of this. And their job is to protect the consumer first, to protect the nation's interests first. Try anything that comes in the way of national interests. You think you're going to be heard? No. But within that, to answer your question, can narratives play an important role? Very important. Very, very important, because you have to cull out what is relevant to them, present it in the right form and fashion, and do good. And that's where, to Nitin's point, like then that's where your comms machinery comes in, right? You have a policy narrative, Nitin, but if your comms team is not supporting you and putting it out, what use is that narrative? So that's why the team's working together.
We can take Facebook offline.
Yeah, completely, please. And what I said is on Chatham House, yeah.
There's a couple of more questions. Anubhuti, can we take more questions, or I know time's up? One more question? Okay. Okay, we have a few minutes.
Okay, me? Okay. Hi, I'm Harshita Nair, Shweta. Hi, Nitin. Hi, Shweta. So as policy, as we all know, has the power to influence, right? And juxtaposed with that, the startup ecosystem is a very fast progressing ecosystem, an industry in India especially. But with anything that progresses so fast, there are challenges. One of the most recent ones we've seen is the well-being of startup founders. We've seen a spate of tragedies of some founders and so on and so forth. Is there anything that Startup Policy Forum is looking to do to focus on that in terms of the well-being of the industry? Because we also hear about horror stories about working in startups. While it's a great place to learn, to grow, to make money, there's also the other aspect of well-being. So is there anything that you can add to that?
I think very important question. The honest answer is not yet. We haven't gotten there yet. We're still, as I said, a 2-month-old forum. We're still finding our feet, though we feel happy that we are already a 50-member strong body, which would probably represent close to about $80 billion of valuation of our startups. But you know what? Again, I don't know the truth there. So I don't think it's fair to pass generalized statements about either startup founders being the ones who are truly, due to stress, facing the kind of tragedies, or is that a general pattern? We don't know. But yes, there have been many unfortunate incidents of founders. Is it due to stress? Is it due to lifestyle? Is it due to post-COVID? Is it due to, I mean, there are all sorts of theories. But the larger question around, I think, workplace cultures and workplace ethics and hours, I think the whole debate also about hours is an interesting, the 70 hours, the 90 hours and all. But I think what I can tell you, being a founder myself and having worked very closely with founders, is that I think when there is passion to build something, and when you know you can scale at a pace that is unimaginable, it's very hard to put brakes then. And that's the opportunity that today India provides, right? I mean, look at quick commerce. Who knew a few months ago we would be where we are at? So how do you tell a founder, don't work 90 hours, work 70 hours, there's passion, there's fire in the belly, they're raring to go. And it's showing in outcomes. Having said that, do you think anybody condones cultures that are unhealthy or that cause stress or cause health issues or mental health issues or physical health issues or burnouts? Absolutely not. And there is no way we will ever condone that as a forum. We would always tell them to take care of their health. We would always tell them to take care of their employees' health. And I think those have to be built in. But it is what it is. A startup is that. You scale fast, you work harder than most others. And I personally, my view is, I've worked across, right? I worked at big tech, I worked in journalism, I worked at a VC firm, and now I'm a founder. I work closely with founders. It is tough all across, and you have to find your own rhythm and balance and space. So I think generalizing startup cultures may not be appropriate, is my view.
Great. Before we wrap up, I'm going to ask you my final question, because I was keeping that, but we had many other questions. So, you've just finished Startup Beta, which is your flagship event, kickoff event. Which is the biggest policy challenge facing startups today across industries? So across gaming or crypto or insurance or whatever, right? I mean, so many of them were there. I met so many people. There's so many issues discussed. And like Shamika Ravi, the economic advisor to the PM, said, you guys don't engage. There's so many issues and you don't engage. So which is that one biggest challenge you feel you need to solve for?
I think perception. If I would take it in a broad brush, because I can go sector-wise and I can say, oh, the startups that are looking to come back, for them it's about reverse flipping. I can talk about fintech and the trust deficit with RBI. I can talk about gaming and GST issues. So yes, cross-sectorally, there are tons of challenges we hope we will solve for. But I think overall, there is a perception crisis right now where, and I think exactly to your point, what Shamika Ravi said, what makes us very, very, I would say, relevant right now is that when you look at big tech, they have very well fleshed out teams. They have sophisticated policy teams, comms teams. They spend big budgets. They understand the value of comms and policy and that. You look at corporate India, largely sorted. They have your forums. They know how to engage with governments. They know that. Startups do not know this game. And I always say this to founders. You're sitting in HSR layout. You're sitting in Indiranagar. You're sitting in Koramangala. There is a very long road from Koramangala, HSR layout and Indiranagar to Vigyan Bhavan, Shastri Bhavan, Electronics, Niketan, Vanijya Bhavan. You need to come there, right? So I think the biggest is for them to understand that they are now at that place, and India is at that moment where they need to have a voice in nation building. They need to be out there, voicing their concerns, voicing their issues, and engaging deeply with government stakeholders. So to answer your question, Nitin, it's about building those bridges.
Great, thank you. On that note, thank you to Shweta for joining us, and thank you for being a wonderful audience.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time, Shweta. May I request Nitin to please present Shweta with a Sparkle gift card?
Yes.